story, The War That Saved My Life, Ada made a scarf for her friend Susan, and she didn't have any knitting needles, so she used pencils. So today I have two number 2 Ticonderoga pencils, which I have sharpened, and oftentimes when you sharpen a pencil, they're a little bit rough, and so I actually dipped the tips of these into clear nail polish just to save a little bit of frustration and also to keep the graphite from the pencils from getting all over my yarn. So to prepare, you want to get 2 pencils and sharpen them. You don't want them super duper sharp because you don't want to stab yourself. And then you want to dip them in some clear nail polish and let them dry overnight. You'll also need some yarn to make a child-sized scarf. You'll need 1 skein with 100 meters or 109 yards. And then you'll need another color to do the fringe. For an adult scarf, you'll need 3 skeins, and that includes the fringe all in 1 color. And we'll be ready to begin. If you're making your scarf all the same color, the first thing you want to do is cut the fringe, because you want to knit all of the yarn that you have into the scarf, but you don't want to leave yourself short for the fringe. And so what I do to cut the fringe is I measure a length of tape that is the length of the fringe piece I need, stick it on the table, and then I pull the yarn across that tape over and over again, and you need 1 piece of fringe for every stitch you cast on and every stitch you bind off. So for the child scarf, you'll need to cut 30. For the adult scarf, you'll need to cut 48. Once you have those, set those aside. We'll get back to them in a little while. And then you're ready to start knitting. So we're going to begin with what's called a long tail cast on. We're going to cast on for the child size scarf. So you want to start with a tail that is about 21 inches long. About, it doesn't have to be exact. And then you're going to tie a slip knot. And to tie a slip knot, this is the ball end of the yarn. It's the one that's still attached to my skein of yarn. And this is the cut end in my right hand. I'm going to take the yarn across the palm of my hand, around the back, and back across the palm of my hand so it makes an X. And then I turn my hand over, reach underneath the first piece, and pull the second one through. This makes a knot that when you tighten it, you can adjust the size of the loop. This is called a slip knot, and you're going to place that on one of your pencils. Move the other pencil out of the way so you don't lose it. And you're going to tighten that down on your needles. Put your finger on top of this loop. That'll stop it from sliding off. The cut end is called the tail, and it goes over your thumb. And then the ball end, which is the end still attached to the ball of yarn, goes over your index finger like this, and you pull down. So it makes a V or a butterfly. And then you're going to take the tip of your pencil and you're going to follow your thumb up and scoop the yarn from your finger back through the loop on your thumb. Over and over, not too tightly. You need them to move freely on your pencil until you have 15 loops, because we're going to cast on for the child-sized scarf. When you've got your stitches cast on, they should move on your needle or on your pencil, which is acting as your needle. If they don't move, you've done it too tightly and you want to start again, because otherwise your end of your scarf will pull in. Once you have all 15 stitches cast onto your pencil, you're going to stop using the tail altogether. If your tail runs out, you're going to have to pull it off and try again with a longer tail to make sure you get all 15 loops. But you don't want to knit with the tail. You won't go very far. You're going to take the needle with the stitches on it, and you're going to turn it over this way and put it in your left hand. And knitting doesn't matter if you're right-handed or left-handed, because you use 2 hands to knit. So I'm going to zoom in so you can watch what I'm doing. There we go. You're going to take the empty needle in your right hand, and you're going to put the pencil tip into that first loop from the front through the middle of the stitch and out the back. and you want to leave your pencils crossed like this, and then you're going to pick up your yarn and you're going to go around this way. So from the back side, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and back to 6 o'clock. And pull the new loop through the old loop. And here's the key, you have to let the old loop go. So you need to push them a little closer to the tip of your left hand pencil and let it drop off. So in, around, back through, and off. In, around, back through, and off. And there's a little rhyme that I use when I teach kids to knit, and it goes like this. In through the front door, run around back, back through the front door, and off jumps Jack. And if Jack does not jump off, you're going to cause yourself all kinds of problems. So make sure to make Jack jump off every time. When you get down to the very last stitch, you just turn it around and go back the other way. If you were to pick a knitting needle to replace these pencils, you would be looking for a knitting needle that is a US 10.5. And I'll show you in just a second when I knit these 3 stitches exactly what that looks like. Knitting needles come in wood, plastic, metal, bone, carbon, all kinds of fiber or different materials, and just use what you can find or what you like. But this is a US size 10.5, and it is the same size as a number 2 Ticonderoga pencil. So if you really get into it and you want needles, that's what you want. So having finished my row, I'm going to turn my pencil over, and you turn it like the pages of a book. So if this is the spine of the book where my thumb is, right here, you pick up the eraser and you go like that, turning the pages of the book. When you start knitting, you want to make sure the yarn is coming down. Pick up your empty pencil now in your right hand. Go into the first stitch just like this and begin again. In through the front door, run around back, back through the front door, and off jumps Jack. That is the entire knit stitch, and I'm going to do a couple of them very slowly so you can see what I'm doing, and you can play this video on loop if you want. But you go in through the front door, make sure the pencils are crossed and the stitches all the way around the needle, that you didn't pierce the yarn with the pencil. Run around back, back through the front door, and off jumps Jack. In through the front door, run around back, back through the front door, and off jumps Jack. You would keep doing this over and over and over again until your scarf is the length you want it to be, or until you run out of yarn. This is the knit stitch. There's only one other kind of stitch in knitting. It's called purling, but for now we're just going to focus on the knit stitch. And here is what it looks like. Let me zoom back out. That's what it looks like. Kind of fun, huh? Next, we're going to talk about how to finish it off. Once you have your scarf knitted, you have to be able to finish it off so that the loops don't unravel. And so to do that, we do something called binding off, which is almost exactly the same as knitting, except you're going to knit the first 2 stitches. Having knitted those 2 stitches, you're going to take the tip of the left needle, pick up the first stitch you knitted, pass it up over the second stitch and off the tip of the right hand needle, letting it go. So where I had 2 stitches, I now have 1. We'll zoom in a little closer and do that again. So to bind off the next one, I'm going to knit 1 more, pick up the rightmost stitch, pull it up over the one to the left and off the needle. Knit, and then leapfrog them off. You do that all the way across your scarf until you get to the last stitch. When you get to the very last one, you're going to need a pair of scissors. You're going to cut the yarn so that you leave yourself a tail that's as long as your scarf is wide. I'll show you what I mean. Bind those off. Okay, we have one stitch left on our right hand needle. We're going to take the yarn and we're going to hold it across the top of our scarf, and then over here we're going to cut it. We're going to cut it so that it is longer than the scarf is wide. And then we're going to take this final stitch, make it just a little bit bigger, pull the needle out, and then feed that tail back through the final loop and pull it tight. There's your scarf finished off. And if you did it correctly by not pulling it too tight, the cast on edge and the bottom edge should be the same width. You should make them the same size. If it's your first attempt, don't worry about it too much. Now we're going to put fringe on. Remember at the beginning of the video, I told you to cut your fringe first. So I have a pile of fringe right here. And I've already fringed one end of this scarf. So you can see there's my fringe all on here. To do this, I need a tool called a crochet hook. And a crochet hook is another form of yarn craft that has a hook at one end and just a rounded tip on the other end. And when you do this, you go to the end that needs the fringe, and we're going to hide this tail at the same time that we put the fringe on. So you take one piece of fringe and fold it in half. Doesn't have to be precise, but fold it in half pretty close so that the tails meet. And you take this tail or this bend, and you can start right here in the very first stitch. Let me zoom in. Here we go. Start right here in the very first stitch, and you're going to go into the stitch, and you're going to come from the bottom side and pull that loop back through the stitch. Pull it up a little bit larger, and then pull the tails through the loop and over the top of the tail from the start of the project. And you tie a little knot. And you want to pull them all from the same side so that the knots all look alike. So pick up the next piece of fringe, fold it in half. I measured these out to be 21 inches long because about an inch of this is going to go into making the knot around the scarf. I want the fringes to be about 10 inches long. So I'm just going to take them, fold each one in half, pull it through a stitch, pull the tails back through the loop, and then pull that loop tight so that it looks nice and neat. And you put one in every single stitch that you cast on and every single stitch that you bound off. And you do that all the way across like this. Makes for a nice full fringe. And when you get them all straightened out and on there in place, just take your fingers, don't use a real comb, but just take your fingers and straighten them out like this. You don't want to go all kinds of crazy with the scissors, giving it a little haircut, because it's really easy to get carried away. But if you have one or two that are just obviously longer than the others, you can trim them up just a little tiny bit, and then you're done with that part. And the last remaining thing to do is to weave in any place that you had to join in a new skein of yarn. So in this scarf, this is the adult size version of the scarf, and I used 3 skeins. I knitted the first 2 skeins, and then I took the 3rd skein and I cut all of the fringe before I knitted the rest of the scarf, and I knitted everything I had into the end of the scarf except for the last 2 yards, which I used to bind off. Every time I came to the end of a skein, I picked up a new skein and just started. You can knot them together or not, whichever way you care to do it. There's no right or wrong way, but when we're ready to knot them off to finish it, I do tie them in knots because oftentimes scarves get a lot of heavy wear and they get washed. So I'm just tying them in a square knot right in place. This is called a tapestry needle, and a tapestry needle has a bigger eye to it where the thread passes through than a sewing needle, and you can buy those in a craft store as well. It's a large eye tapestry needle, or it might be listed as a yarn needle. And you just push the tail of the yarn through the needle, not very far, and then you weave it in. And to weave it in garter stitch, you want to trace the path of the stitch for about 5 or 6 stitches. So this yarn comes down like this, up through this bump here, and then it goes down and around here, and you pull it through, and it comes back up here, back down here, and then down into here. I am literally following the yarn underneath it, just tracing it with the tail. And when you get it all woven in, just leave it long there for a second. Do this one the other way. When you're finished with it, it's really hard to find them once you trim them. So weave them in and then trim them short. Here's my other one. I'm going to come up through this stitch. I take them in opposite directions so I don't make it any bulkier than it needs to be. There we are. And you go about 1 inch each direction. Don't worry if it looks a little uneven as it gets washed and worn. It will absolutely disappear. Then you take your scissors, be careful that you don't cut your scarf, and you trim the tails close to the work, but not actually cutting the work. One there, and one there. And it's all done. And then you have a scarf that you can wear or give to someone you love.